call the port meeting to order at this time. Call roll, please. The machine is open for roll call. All 9 member councils are present. At this time, we'll have the prayer, Mr. Blank, and the pledge by Councilman Gouy.
We take this moment to acknowledge Almighty God and thank Him for our bountiful blessings, especially for the parish's natural resources. We pray for the protection of our parish, residents, and businesses during this hurricane season. We give thanks to God for our brave and courageous men and women in our military who daily risk their lives to protect our precious freedom. And we pray for our world leaders to know how to obtain world peace. We also pray that this government body, comprised of both council and administration, will always serve our parish with honesty, humility, and equality to all. And as this government body gathers here today, we pray for the wisdom to know right from wrong and the courage to do that which is right. And as we express our gratitude, we must never forget that the highest appreciation is not to utter words, but to live by them. Amen.
Amen.
I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
There's no executive session. Status report by Executive Board Director.
Good afternoon, Mr. President, Chairman and Vice Chairman, and members of the board. I am Sandy Sanders, Executive Director of Port Harbor Internal District. Follows is my Executive Director's report for the reporting period of 10 through 23 October of 2019. During this time frame, I participated in a joint parish port mini conference hosted by John Helmers, the Parish Coastal Restoration Director, regarding the Bud Map program. The project. Attendees included members of the Coastal Engineering Group, Parish President, and Commissioner Blank. Coastal Engineering walked us through the details of the proposal that must be sent to the United States Army Corps of Engineers to get the process started. I co-hosted, along with American Patriot Holdings, in the Inland Port Network Conference while attending the Port of New Orleans Port Night in Memphis. We all met and discussed financials, timelines, BCO interaction, terminal operator, and cargo carrier status. Attending were representatives from the ports of Memphis, St. Louis, Little Rock, Western Arkansas, Kansas City, and Chicago, as well as the American Patriot Holdings rep, Sal Latrico. For the third time, we met officials with a South American port covered by an NDA who are keenly interested in a sister port relationship with the PPHTD. This time we met with their principals down in Miami, and this relationship would also involve the use of the American Patriot Holdings vessel in their country's main waterway system. I would like to announce that on Tuesday of next week, 29 October, in the Bell Chase Auditorium, from 4 to 6, there will be an informational open house briefing for an entity known as West Delta. It's an LNG. They plan on putting their project out into the Gulf. They will have a land-based support in Venice Port. And I am also setting up a meeting on Monday. Mr. Konovich and Mr. Chairman, I would like for you all to attend to meet these fellows. But they have a very keen project. They're pretty funded. And obviously, if you put it out in the Gulf, there's not too many people around that can hinder the project. So it's been thought of before, but we're very proud that they chose our jurisdiction and our waters to be in. Mr. Chairman, subject to your questions or comments, this concludes my brief.
Any comments from the table? Audience. Next item, please.
Financial report, budget to actual.
On Tuesday, October 22nd, a budget performance report was sent to the board as of October 22nd, 2019. If there are no questions, that includes my report.
Comments from the table? Audience. Next item, please.
Bids and advertisements. 4A, a resolution authorizing the acceptance of bids for furnishing bulk diesel fuel for the Plaquemine Port Harbor and Terminal District for a period of 1 year.
Would you,
After due advertisement for furnishing bulk diesel fuel for the port recommends the low bidder of Tri-State Oil.
I so offer. Is there a second? Second by Councilman Gouy. Are there any questions from the table?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Mr. LaFrance.
how does these bids compare to the one we received last year?
We send out bid packages the 1st of October every year to about 12 different vendors who have requested to be on our bid list. And they're basically the same as they come and go every year. We usually have the same participants each year that give or take a few other different vendors. But the prices from this vendor is the same price that he quoted last year.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Blank, you had any comments? You had any comments? No. Audience. Machine is open. Passes 9-0. At this time, I would like to move to item 7A1.
A resolution establishing the date, time, and place of public hearings on the proposed 2020 operating budget and capital improvement budget as submitted by the Executive Director of the Plaquemines Port, Harbor, and Terminal District, to authorize the Council Secretary to place the necessary public notice in the Plaquemines Gazette and otherwise to provide respect thereto. Commissioner Bartholomew.
I so offer. Is there a second? Second by Mr. Konovich. The machine is open, table for discussion. Any discussions? I don't see any, but do I have comments? Now we're voting on the suspension only. It passes 9-0. So now it's up for consideration before the council.
A resolution establishing the date, time, and place of public hearings on the proposed 2020 operating budget and capital improvement budget as submitted by the Executive Director of the Plaquemines Port, Harbor, and Terminal District to authorize the Council Secretary to place the necessary public notice in the Plaquemines Gazette and otherwise to provide respect thereto. Commissioner Bartholomew.
I offer. Second by Mr. Konovich. All in favor? Machine is open. No comments from the audience, I'm assuming. Passes 9-0. Back to 5.
Introduction of ordinances and resolutions.
Mr. Roussel.
Yes, I have a resolution of the Plaquemines Parish Council acting as the sole governing authority of the Plaquemines Port Harbor and Terminal District, accepting the operational authority and the budgetary responsibility of the ferries currently operated by the Plaquemines Parish government and otherwise to provide with respect thereto.
Anybody else? I have some. I'll pass over. Next item, please.
Ordinances and resolutions on second reading and final passage. ordinances and public hearings pursuant to Article 6, Section 6.01E of Plaquemines Parish Charter. None. A resolution of the Plaquemines Parish Council acting as the sole governing authority of the Plaquemines Port, Harbor, and Terminal District, accepting.
This item will be deferred.
Yeah, I have.
C, a resolution authorizing Maynard J. Sandy Sanders, Executive Director of the Plaquemines Port, Harbor, and Terminal District, to enter into exclusivity agreement with strategic investment partner and otherwise to provide the respective Commissioner Bartholomew.
Offer. Second by Councilman Bowie. Questions from the table? Yeah, okay, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This agreement is in regards to Chris Fetters, principal of Louisiana 23 Development Company and the Plaquemines Port, Harbor, and Terminal District. I would like to review the highlights of the exclusivity agreement. If you look at your agreement, the wave tops really are paragraph 4. This approval will serve as notice that both parties, i.e. the port and LA 23, both parties' willingness to move ahead with the container terminal development process and attract financial support, with each party agreeing that it will work on an exclusive basis, one to the other, only insofar as the following, and then there's a couple clauses. The exclusivity clause. Although LA 23 is allowed exclusive rights to identify, coordinate, and communicate to propose interested parties to the port with regards to the hereunder 3 notes that I will read. LA 23 shall not negotiate, bind, or enter into any agreement which impacts or binds the port without the approval of the port and, in addition, without the approval of the Plaquemines Parish Council, which we all understand and know that that is the governing authority of our port. The 3 items subject to that for the ongoing development of the container terminal are A, to secure and develop necessary funds, financial partners, and operators for the rail infrastructure improvements, specifically the Marsh Rail Bridge. Also, LA 23 agrees that at the written request of the port and the current rail operator to assist that rail operator as needed to fulfill the obligations as to with the proposed terminal operator. Item B, warehousing facilities to be developed by the container terminal facilities and secondary handling facilities in support of the anticipated air car terminal. And lastly, support supply chain services, which include LNG bunkering, mitigation banking, utility services, and construction supply materials as needed. Paragraph 5, and I'm going to hit a couple paragraphs here. Both parties agree that LA 23 and the port, independently or collectively, will work with beneficial cargo owners, freight forwarders, cargo shippers, international containing shipping companies, or alliances, and other prospective importers or exporters to assist in developing the container business for the port and other port development projects. Paragraph 10. At no point during this agreement shall LA 23 be compensated by the port for any services provided or expenses for work performed. Paragraph 12. This agreement does not entitle LA 23 to participate in negotiations with any prospective terminal operator or tenant who the port may separately engage or with whom it may negotiate without express written request or approval from the port. And then lastly, at paragraph 21, this agreement can be terminated by either party with a 30-day written notice. They can terminate it or we can terminate it. but in no event shall this agreement have terms exceeding over 7 years, unless both parties agree in writing to amend the term. If the agreement is terminated by either party, the provisions of the NDA will survive and both parties will continue to be bound by the terms and conditions contained therein. Mr. Chairman, prior to turning this over to Mr. Fetters and then questions, I understand that there's been a concern of how Mr. Fetters was introduced to the port and what involvement at other state agencies there were. So I have asked Mr. Tommy Clark to address how Chris was introduced to the port. Mr. Clark was the first governor-appointed commissioner of the newly established Office of Multimodal Commerce. The reason this was stood up, because there was a general complaint by many of the ports that monies that were going into DOTD were predominantly being spent on rail, highways, and bridges, and little was going to the ports. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I introduce Mr. Tommy Clark, the Commissioner of Intermodal, former Commissioner of Intermodal.
Please state your name and address.
Good afternoon, Thomas Clark, 3116 Veranda View Avenue, Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Apologize for my seasonal allergies have taken residence in my throat, but yes, as my duties for, former duties for Commissioner of Multimodal Commerce from 2016 to 2019 encompassed surveying all of our assets of multimodal commerce, anything that handled freight or commerce in this state via highway, rail, waterway, aviation, fell under my domain. And as a result of that, of my early on education of our assets, I was introduced to Sandy Sanders, and he was kind enough to give me a demonstration on the master plan of this port and some of the opportunities that it arose. And right off the bat, I saw that it had great global game-changing opportunities for it. And as I traveled around the state and tried to absorb all of our assets and what they can mean from a strategic standpoint of offering our state, in addition to a mission trip to Panama to witness the tremendous growth of the new expansion of the Panama Canal and the private investment that's going on both sides of the canal, it was evident to me that we could replicate that in this state within our 250-mile stretch from Baton Rouge to the mouth of the Mississippi River, and utilizing our 5 deepwater ports as a comprised alliance of ports that were second to none in the world. So it kind of set us on a global game-changing stage, and Plaquemines Parish and its potential was an integral part of that strategic vision, if I may say that. I kept both Secretaries Pearson and Wilson, as well as the governor, apprised of all of this strategic vision. All of them were supportive of that. They saw the importance of where this could be a global game-changing from a standpoint of increasing our imports and exports to the state, taking advantage of all of our assets. And in the course of my making presentations around the state, I always made it a point to point out that Plaquemines Parish Port had a great potential for growth. And as I told every engineer that was in the room that was always looking for a job, engineers are always looking for work. I said, go down and introduce yourself to Sandy Sanders. But don't go down there in the traditional handout looking for work, because they're not going to pay you. They're looking for money to help them realize their vision. So go down there with a financial solution. I said that to every engineering firm, every engineering business development person that I came in contact with. I was introduced to Chris Fetters along that way, and I told him the same thing. I said, if you're looking for some work, go down and see Sandy, but go down there with a financial solution. And that's how the connection between Sandy and Chris happened. I was just connecting dots. I'm glad to entertain any questions, or I can sit down and shut up.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Question, excuse me, Mr. Russell. Yep, cue back in, please. You got it? Okay. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Clark, for your service to the state and all of the efforts that you've put in trying to make the ports a better opportunity for the state to grow. I understand that, you recommended Mr. Fetters to the port strictly as on his own. I happened to speak to Secretary Wilson yesterday and to your to the Economic Development part yesterday, and it's their policy that they do not recommend anyone to be hired per se. Is that correct?
That's correct, yeah. We don't make recommendations. We help facilitate wherever we can. So we're kind of dot connectors.
Right, and you're no longer with the department?
That's correct.
And so, do you have any financial arrangement with Mr. Fetters at this time?
None whatsoever.
You plan on having any?
Not that I'm aware of.
And so you're just coming to tell us how we got the dots connected?
Yes, sir.
And are you making a recommendation on this this exclusive agreement?
I'm making a recommendation that this parish body seriously consider the strategic opportunities that you have at hand with the development of this port and what it can mean to the state and the nation.
Would you agree that we all want to see this port develop?
Yes, sir.
And I agree with that as well. And so we're here today to decide on an exclusivity agreement, which is a different issue than all of us wanting to support the port growing, which may be a part of getting there. And I'll yield to the questions that we move on. But I thank you for your time and your service. And I just wanted to be clear that the state is not recommending this agreement in any form or fashion because they do not do that. Correct?
That's correct.
So thank you.
We're supportive of all, the state is supportive of all private investment because as a result, one of the reasons why I encourage people to come down here is because we knew the state did not have the money to help support or subsidize or fund a project of this magnitude. It was going to have to come from the private sector.
And we all agree with that? And we all want to see that the port grow? And as far as recommending specific contracts, which we are dealing with today, I wanted to make that clear to where we stand today so we can vet that issue as it comes up. But again, thank you for your service.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Quite welcome.
Thank you, Tommy. Shortly after Chris was introduced to us, Chris came with his curriculum vitae and presented himself to me. I, in turn, had him sign a non-disclosure agreement right away, and then set him up to be interviewed and vetted by our port contacts counselors. That was Mr. John Vickerman and Mr. Bob Stevens, our consultants. Vickerman more in the engineering swim lane, Bob Stevens in the contract negotiation. Chris has been working with the port for 2+ years, continually being vetted by me and the deputy, Paul Matthews. He brought the port, the Plaquemines Liquid Terminal, as his first case to see what he could do. And during that 2-year period, most of you on the board have had numerous interactions with him. So at this time, I would like to introduce Chris Fetters, and I know that he has met with all the board members, either in small groups or one-on-ones here in the last 2 weeks, getting your concerns and implementing a lot of those concerns into the agreement. So, Chris, go ahead.
Thank you, Sandy. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Chris Fetters. Office location is 8748 Highway 23, Suite 200 here in Bellchase. My home address is 13836 Kimballton Avenue in Baton Rouge. So again, as Sandy said, I had the opportunity to meet with a number of you individually and in groups over the past few weeks and past few months on this topic as well as others. I have taken into consideration a lot of the observations that were made, offered revisions to the original draft agreement for consideration by the Port Administration and subsequently by you as the convening authority. So I make myself available to any secondary or follow-up questions that may be necessary for review of the agreement.
Comments from the table? Mr. Rizal?
Go ahead.
You on? Go ahead, it's on. You on?
No, I'm not.
Yeah.
Am I?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Fetters, for meeting with us over the the last week and answering some of the questions. And as you know, I was concerned and still am concerned about the agreement and how this is necessary.
Sure.
I have a few questions. For instance, and I'll address this to you and as well as to Mr. Rathburn as the legal counsel for the port. Paragraph 4 provides for an exclusivity clause in favor of LA 23. Can you tell me how much LA 23 is compensating the port for this exclusivity?
Zero. No dollars.
So the port is giving this free of charge?
That's
And this-
my understanding. Yes, sir.
Okay. And if we approve this contract, could a company come to the port to do any of the things set forth in paragraph 4 without going through LA 23?
As I understand it, yes, they can. I defer to Mr. Rathburn, because everything that is in here is my understanding as the recipient of this would be that it is at the discretion of the port administration. So if any point in time they intervene or intercede that it is in the benefit of the port for me to not be involved, then I have agreed to step aside.
And so why would a company prefer to go through LA 23 and pay them a fee instead of just dealing directly with the port and saving that fee to LA 23?
Because in the course of evaluating opportunities such as this, in my work experience and history, I've offered technical advice as an engineer, as a consultant in the past. There is not, well, Mr. Sanders and Mr. Matthews have done an exceptional job of getting out there and getting the brand out. As Mr. Clark insinuated to you guys, that the opportunity that is here is what we refer to as the greenfields. So that requires a lot of risk by potential investment partners. So I participate in that, in the vetting process through the negotiation and conversations with the port administration, understanding the local regulatory environment, environmental and engineering environments that go along with it, and help them to determine in a preliminary status whether this is a vested interest for them or not. And for that, I receive a fee if there is a success.
From the client that would be of the port?
What would be considered the leaseholder for that asset.
And in paragraph 13, it seems a little confusing to me and as well as to our counsel. It appears to reference a circumstance in which a section of this agreement conflicts with the exclusivity clause, but it does not appear to establish if the exclusivity clause or the other unnamed section would take priority. Can you please explain how your provision, paragraph 13, working?
I defer to Mr. Rathburn to start since it's.
That was my fault, Mr. Roussel. Mr. Garrett did point out that there was a grammatical error with that, and that's on me. I missed it. I just left out what was intended here. I do have what I intended to state was that it is agreed between the parties that the exclusivity clause in Section 4 of this agreement is subject to all other sections of this agreement. And what I am trying to bring forward is to give LA 23 notice that you can't simply focus on the exclusivity clause without regard to the rest of the agreement. This is extra protection for the port. That's my intention to let Mr. Fetters know as the principal of LA 23 that not only are you subject to the exclusivity clause, all restrictions in this agreement apply to you. And that was my fault.
So are we going to have a clean copy to adopt with those
Yes,
correct
sir.
language?
I did make the correction, and I believe I intended, okay, I apologize. Yes, sir, we do. Ms. Harrelin had brought it up here to provide to the council.
Let's get it up here.
Okay, would you please distribute it?
Yes, sir.
I'll move along while you're doing that. Do you know of any other port that has a similar like agreement?
Not that I'm aware of, but I also don't realize that there's any other port jurisdiction that has a similar status as what this is regarding the Greenfields development. Majority of ports that are in the world that are currently in function or have been in operation longstanding, and so they have different arrangements that are with them.
So we're the only port that would do this in the world that if we adopt this?
As I understand it right now, that this is because of the greenfield nature of what your opportunity is in front of you.
All right. Paragraph 14 speaks to the jurisdiction and venue of the lawsuit to resolve any disputes. And paragraph 15 references a party seeking remedy for breach. Then paragraph 19 provides that the stipulated damages for breach shall be dissolution of the contract with the exception of the confidentiality provision. Would you please explain that one?
Which one of the three would you like me to start with?
The first one.
So with 14, as I understand it, if there's any dispute, it's to be resolved here in the parish.
And do you have language to clear that up as well in this contract? Moving on to paragraph 15, references a party seeking remedy for breach, then paragraph 19 stipulated damages.
It says it.
Okay, 14, I apologize, Mr. Roussel. 14 does state that this will be in the state of Louisiana, parish of Plaquemine, so I'm not sure what the question, I apologize, I didn't understand the question.
Well, I was looking at the section where it says, in the choice of law statutes. What does that mean to me? I mean, it says, this agreement is entered into in contemplation of and shall be construed in accordance with the laws of the state of Louisiana, excluding its conflicts and choice of law statutes.
Okay, that's, forget the term boilerplate. That is what you find in most business contracts, that you have a choice of law, the only exclusion being, the choice of law being Louisiana, the only exclusion being there's a set of statutes regarding choice of law of Louisiana. And all of the contracts, I believe, that we've ever had would have that provision in there. At the end of the day, what we are stating is that in this contract will be interpreted pursuant to Louisiana law.
Okay. That's what you interpret this to mean. I'm going to ask the council to opine on this in a minute, but let me move on. Could you, Mr. Rathburn, can you give me an example of the circumstances where LA 23 could claim the port committed a breach of the contract?
Where LA 23 could claim?
Can you give me an example of the circumstances where LA 23 could claim that the port committed a breach of the contract?
Yes, sir. Any points in the agreement that are covered here would include if any of the obligations that the port has regarding to the exclusivity clause that wasn't met by the port would be a breach of it. Those three subsections 2, 4. So if, let me flip to 4. Okay. So LA 23 is granted the exclusive contract with regards to securing funds for rail infrastructure. If in fact they had brought to the port someone to invest and secure the infrastructure, the port could not cut LA 23 from working through the provider.
So following up on that theory, the work that has been done over the last 5 years, at least since I've been here, and all of the effort that has been made by consultants, by staff, to bring in individual opportunities, are those opportunities on the table for LA 23 to pick up and get a contract with and move forward?
No, sir, not if they've been brought in already. If they
So following that up, all of the container terminal people that we've met with, the Chinese, and everybody else that's come through, those are off the table for Mr. Fetters to go out and recruit as clients.
That's correct. That is correct.
And so,
As I understand it as well, too, sir.
and so the cargo carrier that we've been dealing with is not on the table for Mr. Fetters to engage in.
That is correct.
And Mr. Fetters, do you have any agreements with anybody at this time that you foresee bringing to the table?
Not from a terminal operation standpoint or an operator asset. I have a number of agreements with financial institutions that are contingent upon the commercial movement of some of these opportunities that are in front of us.
And would those financial institutions be providing financing to any of the clients that we have brought to the table?
Only at the express consent or request of either the client that is here or the Port Authority, because there is some form of a delay or an issue that may be resolved. but they would not be allowed to move forward without any form of a consent by the port.
So the prospective clients that we have lined up now are on the table for financing from Mr. Fetters. Is that correct?
I
No,
don't
sir.
know, I don't know that.
No, sir.
I'm asking the question.
Not that we are aware of, not that I'm aware of.
So what I'm trying to get to is where's the starting point for this contract? And how do we distinguish between all of the effort and those individuals that have come forward wanting to express interest in locating here? And then how do we funnel everybody that has come through here to one financial source? And if that's not the case, then all of those individuals, and I'd like to see a list of that, to know who is qualified to work through Mr. Fetters' effort and who is not.
I'm trying to determine who, you're waiting for an answer from. I
As
apologize.
far as the cargo carrier and the terminal operator, go, they're bringing their own money. And this is not between Fetters and those people. That's totally the terminal. These are the ancillary supply chain services that are required to make the port go. So they will be using their own money. That is the attraction of the true public-private partnership. Their own money for the terminal and the cargo. And then the port's portion of that is we have to come up with the supply chain services that will support the operation, i.e. highways, railroads, warehousing, et cetera.
And so these ancillary functions will not be part of the build-out, for instance, of a container terminal like the LNG bunkering. That's not going to be part of the facility. That's going to be a separate project.
That's correct. That's correct, yes, sir. Typically, in a container terminal operator's mindset, as I understand it, they are going to be focused with their investment grade on the dockside services, the cranes, the wharfage, mooring, and components of that. Some terminal operators may elect to be able to want to put things behind the fence, and again, my agreement is that I would not enter or request to enter at any time, only if the port asked or the terminal operator asked for any form of assistance. In the scenario that we have in front of us, it is my understanding that that is not their intent, so the dockside rail services and warehousing are beyond the scope of their investment portfolio. So they are looking for the port and/or the port services to be provided in cooperation with their development, their due diligence process, which is the offering that I'm making, to be able to step forward with some of the financial institutions that I can bring to bear with, as well as the engineering partners and expertise that my team has, in order to be able to facilitate that in a timely manner to correspond to the terminal operator's demands.
And back to the list, do we have a list of who qualifies for, who disqualifies really for Mr. Fetters' services that we've already engaged?
I think everyone we've spoken to, as far as like when Tommy Clark said, we've talked to dozens of engineers, architects, et cetera, and I said, it's fair game for everybody. So there's not a list of who's on and who's off by any stretch.
Well, I'm referring to Mr. Fetters' contract, who has the problem that I have is the exclusivity language here. It's my understanding that Mr. Fetters could go out today and recruit anybody that he wanted to recruit, get a contract, earn a fee, and bring to the port without this contract. Is that correct?
As stated in paragraph 4, his exclusivity allows exclusive right to identify, coordinate, communicate in regards to securing and developing the necessary funds, financial partners, and operators for the rail infrastructure improvements, specifically the Marsh Rail Bridge. He also has agreed that in the event the NOGC may need help with their projects, that he would assist with them. The warehousing and facilities to be developed to support the container terminal facilities and the secondary handling facilities in support of the anticipated air cargo. And lastly, the supply chain services, including the LNG bunkering, the mitigation banking, the utility services, and the construction supply materials services as needed. And these services will be coordinated and prioritized to support and enable to the fullest extent permitted by law the Plaquemines Parish-based businesses and interests. So we have a Plaquemines first mentality. That's my goal. I know that's the goal of all you 9 guys, to go Plaquemines first. And then we'll move outside of that as need be, as the expertise within the parish allows.
And so I'll rephrase my question. All of the items that you just read in the contract, is there any reason why Mr. Fetters could not go out and get a contract with any of the services to provide what you just read and enter in a contract with those people and bring them to the port without this contract?
Well, I think what Mr. Fetters is protecting is his, the way that he has developed over the last many years of how he approaches this. And he's not going to give his playbook away to anyone and everyone that says, I want to jump in there. So that is what he's protecting. You want to add to that?
Yeah, I would add to that. I mean, I understand where your question is coming from, but sure, I can go and do this with a total risk to myself, which is what I've been doing for the last 2 years. As these opportunities are starting to actually cement themselves and become realized assets, the ability for other people to come in and garner on the work that's already been done to date and the opportunity is what I'm asking for protection on. I've been here for 2 years. I've done this at risk for 2 years, brought an opportunity that this council in its previous iteration approved to do so. And moving forward with the assets that are on the table for discussion, what I'm asking for, because I'm not looking for compensation on this from the port side of the house, what I'm looking for is protection and coverage so that as we open these discussions and we do these things, exclusivity agreements are only as good as what they are, as far as written on paper, whether it's a non-disclosure or it's exclusivity here. But I have to provide myself and afford myself the most protection that I can so that as we go through these developments, as others do want to come online and the Port Authority does begin to start to have revenues of its own, that the work that I've done to date is protected.
And I would understand your position and not want to lose a lot of work. And I would also think that you should probably have contracts with people to protect your work. However, what would protect the port from having an individual or an entity come in and say, I'd like to do the same thing, let's use bunkering, or let's use mitigation bank. And I want to approach the port and say, I'd like to have this opportunity to provide this to you. What is to prevent the port from engaging that entity?
Well, except for the clauses that are within here as it supports to the container terminal.
So,
Yeah, I mean, that's what this is about, is that
Yes.
this is, you've got the preeminence of what's about to happen with here and the efforts that have been put in to date. These are the assets that have been requested by the proposed terminal operator as being necessary to fulfill the due diligence process and obligated by the port. And the port in its current condition does not have the financial ability to go out and bid this, and they don't own the asset, whether it's the property, the right-of-way, or the technology to provide those services. So to date, I've put forth that effort at an at-risk component to be able to get to this point, knowing where we are. And what I'm asking for is the exclusivity to finish my work so that it's done in a manner where at the last minute, you don't have a bunch of coyotes that come in and try to pilfer what your work has already been done today. That's why I'm not asking for compensation, simply the exclusivity to finish what we started.
well, I'm not going to carry this on any longer. My concern and issue is that we are telling the world we are open for business, but at the same time, we're telling them that as regards to this project, you can't come in and do business with the port unless you go through the financial situation that we're setting up with the exclusivity in this agreement. And I think that is a bad message to send. I understand you've invested time and effort and, money. That's happening every day around the world.
Yes.
And so it's not unusual. What is unusual is that we are here today to give an exclusivity and protection to an entity that precludes the rest of the world from coming in and making opportunities to this port. And so that's the heartburn I have. I've told you that in person. And it makes no sense to me that if you can do what you can do without this contract, then you can do it and bring it here. And I'm sure that the port will entertain you. And the other factor is that the port is adversarial, is advising us that they are proponents of your exclusivity agreement. And to me, that's short-sighted if we are expecting the rest of the world to come in and participate in the development of the port. So having said that, I'm going to yield the floor.
Councilman Conovich?
I got concerns with the 7 years. We don't want to put other things on to the next council, but here we're going to put this on to them. Another question I got, you the CEO of LA 23? Who's DEFCO?
It's the same company, Louisiana 23 Development Company.
It says LA 23 or DEFCO.
Where are you referring to? I'm sorry.
Line 1 on the old one, it's got the purpose of this agreement, and it goes to LA 23 DEFCO, and it's got in parentheses LA 23 or DEFCO.
Those are just two common references to my company, that's all.
I think that's an old,
Yeah, we just got the new one, so I'm going off the old one. The one we had in our packet.
In either event, Mr. Kokemich, it's just two different simple references to the company, whether it be LA 23 or DEVCO. It's just common references in there. I believe, though, that through the remainder of the body of the updated version, it should just be simply referred to as LA 23.
Mr. Kokemich, there was an updated version of this sent out by Mr. Matthews, I believe, a week or so ago, and I think the one you have was the original introduction one, but he sent around to all the council persons the updated version, and that mistake that you're talking about was taken out of there.
And in response to your concern regarding the 7 years, in a typical development scenario such as what the size that we're discussing here in a multi-billion-dollar range, these are not typically 1, 2, 3 year type of ordeals or events. 10 years is what I originally had asked for. I understand the reservation of the council on any form of a renewal, to your point of encumbering a future council to whatever this agreement is. So we settled on 7, and then we also inserted the 30-day clause that in the event something were to go awry on either side of the party, that clause can be enacted as well. So the maximum term of this agreement is 7 years, but there is a 30-day exit period with written notification by either party to overcome some of those possible concerns.
There's no way to go into an agreement without the exclusivity agreement. Just do a contract with you saying, hey, you're gonna handle this for the container part, and
In my mind, the agreement is actually probably a lesser form obligation to the port and to the administration than a contract would be, because a contract, and correct me if I'm wrong, typically insinuates some form of compensation direct. So this was crafted as an agreement, allowing both parties to work together in this type of an exclusive arrangement for the set articles here within.
And Mr. Konovich, this is also in the same swim lane of the exclusivity that we gave American Patriot Holdings. And the reason for that is they had a lot of time, money invested in their project. They brought it to us, and we granted that exclusivity because here they are bringing this, and if we were to allow every person who came up with a similar idea, they couldn't get their project off the ground. So the board recognized it at that time and granted them exclusivity, and that's, again, along those same lines.
thank you.
Councilman Blank?
Yes, this is report staff. Have individual experts in the mitigation banking field, finance field, bunkering, et cetera, been reached out to as individual requests for proposals been sent to folks in those individual fields? It seems like a awful lot for one entity or one person's bandwidth to be handling.
In the presentation that I attended with Mr. Fetters, I think he showed you what his bandwidth is. It's a lot more than just Mr. Fetters. We've talked to numerous LNG folks. We've talked to mitigation. We need as much mitigation as we can possibly get to protect the project investment, the port itself. I want the mitigation done locally. I don't want them to get mitigation credits over in Houma because that doesn't give us any protection.
And I think to add to that, Mr. Blank, is that right now, in its current format, in the timeline that's ahead of us regarding this specific terminal operation potential, that the ability to procure credits, as you know in your history, takes a process. You have to identify what the impact is, and then you have to go through the evaluation and offset credit process of the Corps. With regard to bunkering and LNG, right now, as everyone is aware throughout this state and throughout this country, there's a fervor for LNG export. This particular opportunity is focused in and around what I would consider to be LNG retail. So that is the ability to provide liquefied natural gas to the vessel operators themselves. That is a much shorter list of people that have an interest because of the overall market on the export and the focus therein. So when you talk about that, that is, again, an effort that needs to be sought out to identify the proper operator with funding that has the ability to not only provide services and placements potentially, but also has the ability to grow and meet the demands of whatever the commercial asset would require. So again, it's not a typical open market environment, sending an RFP out to just every LNG facility that's out there, and you do the research on them, and the majority of them, I would say probably greater than 95%, their FERC permits are allotted for export. This, again, calls for a specialty. There are technologies that exist out there, but those technologies require investment, which, again, is where my network and my company come into play to pair both the technology with the investment and provide that entity access and introduction to the port. So there's a seeking out to fulfill the obligation request of this opportunity, which is the container terminals request, as an example.
So there haven't been any RFPs for mitigation outside of just asking Mr. Fetters to handle it? Got it.
Sir?
Thank you.
Mr. Blank, finish. Councilman Roussel?
One final question here. On paragraph 9, it says the agreement shall remain unaltered in full force and effect unless mutually agreed upon by both parties or otherwise provided for in this agreement. Who is authorized to make amendments to this contract?
Mr. Roussel, since anything that would change this contract would impact the port, I would reference us back to the part of the agreement that says it has to go for port approval as well as approval of the Plaquemines Parish Council as the governing authority. If in fact pursuant to 9, it would make the council more comfortable if that said and shall be subject to council approval, we could insert that because I believe it's already in the agreement. Nothing can be done without coming to the council for approval, including amendment of this contract.
I just want it on record.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Because, I know how things get amended and task orders get issued and those type of things. So it's important to me that, even though I don't support this exclusivity concept, that at least the document reflects what we say it does.
Yes, sir.
Councilman Goy?
I want to thank you, Mr. Fetters. I know you've met with each of us multiple times. I can't count the number of times we've met and gone through these lines and the concerns of other council members after they were expressed to you in those previous meetings. And I've seen the dynamics of this thing and how it's changed from the initial draft. And I appreciate your cooperation with that and helping us to get this document. And this is not the first exclusivity we've done. I mean, we've done the thing with APH, and we've given them a timeline also. I'm very happy with the final outcome. I think the port is protected, and I think that the vision that we started 10 years ago is finally starting to become clear. I think that this is like one of the final nails that we have to drive home to bring everything to bear the fruits that we've been planting seeds for all these years. So I want to let you know and the port know that because of those efforts and of the time that we spent on this, that I'm supporting this because I think this is our next step to getting where we want to go.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Councilman LaFrance?
I would like to know what is the difference between LA 23 and Trident?
Good question. LA 23, the DevCo, that's Chris Fetters. Trident is Bob Stevens. And there was a concern that was raised in one of our meetings that it specifically said Bob Stevens, and we took that out based on the concern of one of our council folks, and we just put in consultants. So, but that is the difference.
Any other questions from the?
Yes, I'm not finished.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you was finished. Excuse me?
Contracted with NOLA Terminal?
No, sir, I was not.
Mr. Chairman, since I just been handed this new agreement here, I would ask that you defer this.
That's, Mr. Stewart, would you remove your second for deferral? Sir. You want to remove your second? Okay, next.
Finished? Thank you, sir. Thank you, lady. Thank you, gentlemen.
Mr. Attorney, Parish Attorney, you have any comments from the council standpoint? Council Attorney, Mr. Garrett? Do you have any concerns?
And on the policy issue, that's y'all's claim. On the rewrite of 13, and I can confer with Ken on this, was it intended to say that the exclusivity clause in Section 4 is subservient to the other sections? Because it just says subject to. And it just seemed like my understanding before I got a copy of it was you were trying to establish the priority.
No,
So-
that was not my intention. My intention was to make sure that LA 23 understood that they could simply focus on the exclusivity clause without regard to the other restrictions provided to LA 23 in the remainder of the agreement. If there would be suggested language that you and I could speak of, I'd be happy to talk. That's the intent of that clause.
And like I said, I was just trying to, because the original version of it indicated if there were somehow a conflict between some other section of the exclusivity clause, we were trying to decide which would trump it.
And that's why I took note of your concern and said, let me rewrite this to make it clear.
The only other question from a technical standpoint is in paragraph 19, it references that stipulated damages for the breach of this agreement shall be dissolution of the agreement.
Right, that's correct.
But does that, so that would be limited, would that apply if there was a claim for ancillary damages?
Yeah, there are no ancillary damages to be had since in this particular case, the port is coming to this contract without paying the other side a penny. Therefore, to try to stipulate damages on either side would be problematic since there's no money exchange of hands for services. So the remedy is to simply say this contract is dissolved.
Well, and I guess, and that was my understanding of what it was intended to say, but by referencing simply stipulated, would it actually be more clear to amend it to state damages of whatever nature for breach of this agreement shall be limited to the dissolution of the agreement without any further. Because that way, there's no, it seems like it encapsulates everything.
I would have no problem with that. I think the language does do that, but I understand what you're saying, and I would have no problem with it being amended accordingly, but I think that provision actually encompasses that concept.
For that, I'd like to defer this item till we get it legally straight. Two attorneys get together and work it all out. And we have to come to a vote at the next council meeting. We'll come to a vote.
I believe.
Why don't we just do it now?
Point of order.
Yes, go ahead.
And my point of order is, there's still a second on the table.
Okay, but if you go out and vote no for it. Now, you want to do that? That's up to y'all. I want to defer so we can pass it next time to get all this worked out. So if we're not, you can call for the questions.
Call for the question.
Mr. Stewart, you covered? Good.
Not a debate.
Point of order, Mr. Russo called the question. Sorry, Mr. Gooey.
There's still folks in the queue to speak.
Still got, and the
Mr. Russo called?
You withdraw your call the question, Mr. Rochelle, for the council members? Yes, I know, I'm just letting you know. You got to give him.
I withdraw my motion.
Take it off. Mr. Conovich.
You know, it's this back and forth stuff. I ain't got nothing against Mr. Fetters or the port. I want to build it like everybody else up here. And like Mr. Gooey said, people been spreading seeds. Well, that's my concern, the people who's been spreading the seeds. I want to find out more. I've talked to him, Mr. Fetters, twice. We just got this new agreement. And right now, I'm not for the exclusivity. That's it.
Councilman Black?
Port Administration, how long has this item been in circulation as far as the exclusivity agreement?
So with the original introduction, it's frankly been over a month, and we reached out to the entire board to ask for their considerations, suggestions, comments, questions, so that we could amend the agreement. Also reached out to Mr. Garrett as well for any of his thoughts, and then we changed it as such, and it was sent out to the entire board. Not today, but actually over a week ago. And so the only change that was today was the typo that Mr. Kent talked about, which I think we settled today. But this has been in circulation for more than a week, if not 2 weeks, just on the one that's been the final update. And then it's been over a month since this has been introduced.
So you've spoken to, at least in person or via phone or email, every council member?
Yes.
And listened to their concerns, made amendments?
Absolutely.
Do you feel comfortable that you've addressed every issue that Mr. Rousseau gave today? And Mr. Rathburn, you feel comfortable that you've addressed the issues with Mr. Garrett?
I believe I have, sir.
All right, well, with that, I don't think we need to waste any more time. I'll call the question.
The question has been called. We still have people in the queue. You don't want to take it up? You don't want to give your colleagues time to speak?
I will.
Oh, yes or no? If you want to go for the call for it, you call for it. But I'm telling you, I'm voting no. This is it.
Chairman, I agree. Well,
All right,
you
what
know,
you want to do?
I'll remove my question in order for the folks in the queue to speak. However, the question goes back to order after that is done.
You have to request it.
Then I'll call the question.
Machine is
I'm
open
giving
for the
everybody an
question.
opportunity, Mr. Chairman.
The question has been called.
Okay.
The machine is open.
Councilmember Blank, are you voting?
Five, four, it fails. Back to introductions, please.
Introduction of ordinances and resolutions.
Yes. I have several. Councilman Good, you have some? Would you go?
Ready? Yeah, a resolution elected the Plaquemines Port Harbor and Terminal District Chairperson for 2020 and otherwise to provide with respect thereto. A resolution electing the Plaquemines Port Harbor and Terminal Vice Chairman for 2020 and otherwise to provide with respect thereto.
Okay. I have two. A resolution to cancel the November 28, 2019 and December 22nd, 2019 regular scheduled port meeting due to the Thanksgiving and otherwise to provide respect thereto. And authorize an ordinance authorizing Sandy Sanders, Executive Director of Plaquemines Port Harbor and Terminal District, to purchase land owned by Wayne Paul Perrin. Those are my answers. And, you want to go do that? Go ahead.
I have one more. Resolution authorizing Maynard J. Sandy Sanders, Executive Director of the Plaquemines Port Harbor and Terminal District, to enter into an exclusivity agreement with Strategic Investment Partner and otherwise to provide with respect thereto. You have that already.
Next item, please.
Approval of the October 10th, 2019 meeting minutes.
Offer is a second.
Second.
Second by Ms. Newberry and Mr. Cross. Machine is open. Passes 9-0. Approval of adjournment. Offer, second. Second by Mr. LaFrance. Machine is open.
Councilmember Blank.
It's 9-0. The meeting is adjourned. What's the time, please? 2:07.